Trump transition team also considering an executive order aimed at top military officers. This is from an exclusive report from the Wall Street Journal. It would establish a board with the power to review top generals and admirals and recommend removals of any deemed unfit for leadership.
The Journal reports the proposed order says it is aimed at improving strategic readiness. Critics say it could be an effort to politicize the military. With us now is retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and retired Lieutenant Colonel at Defense Priorities. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Just want to start off with your reaction to that report by the Wall Street Journal about the order about this committee that could purge, review, and kind of change the look of the military.
Well, look, it's a thorny issue because I have myself long advocated that there needs to be some changes in some of the general officers, because we've kind of gotten just stultified into like patterns that are frankly not helpful. And it's been a number of generals that have failed at some pretty high profile positions, and no one's ever been held to account. If this is something that's just aimed at improving the quality of the officer corps and elevating the entire organization to put great people in these positions, and there certainly are many of those, that's one thing. But if it's to go after people who are deemed not politically pure or something like that, then that's a very dangerous situation. I certainly hope that doesn't come into play.
Could it be retribution, given what these past generals have said, very critical of former President Trump?
Well, I mean, that's the risk that you run, of course. I mean, you can have this panel and it can say it's going to do anything it wants to publicly, but the question is, what would it do privately? And listen, we do have history of the past. I mean, George C. Marshall famously got rid of a lot of what he called deadwood among a large number of general officers ahead of World War II, because he wanted to do that very thing to elevate the capabilities. So it's really going to matter who's in charge of this and what the criteria is, and we just don't know that yet.
Let's move now to Trump's pick to lead the Pentagon. This is grabbing a lot of headlines this morning. The Fox News host and Army veteran Pete Hegseth. What is your initial reaction? This is another case where you've got a big-time Trump supporter who doesn't have a lot of senior leadership experience.
Well, and that's the big problem. There's two things that you need in any pick. Number one, you do need somebody who's loyal to the vision of the President of the United States, and that goes across the board to all of these picks. You've got to have somebody who will faithfully execute the intent of the President. That should be self-evident. But it's also equally important that you have the capacity to make it happen, and that's where I think Pete's going to need a lot of help. I'll be looking very, very closely to see who the Deputy Secretary of Defense pick is made, and I would wager that that's going to be somebody with a lot of either business experience or Pentagon experience, or maybe a general officer, retired general officer, somebody like that who understands the Pentagon. I worked in the Pentagon during my time on active duty, and I can assure you it is a labyrinth that is very, very difficult, lots of internal politics, and that's one of the biggest things why you need somebody with heft in this job, because you've got to be able to be the primary advisor for the President of the United States. You have to understand how the armed forces work across the board, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, what they can do, what they can't do. And then you've got to have a good internal politics capabilities, because you can't go in and make enemies of all these generals before you even get into office. And then there's the external. You almost have to be a diplomat. You see the current Secretary of Defense often meets with foreign leaders of his counterparts, friendly nations, unfriendly nations. You've got to be able to work with allies and to even work with some of our adversaries to get things done good for the Americans, and that's going to be a tall order for Pete's experience.
And just to stress the experience, Hegseth was a captain, a bronze medal recipient, many years in the military. Lloyd Austin is a 4-star general, so we're talking about very different levels of experience.
Certainly, and another thing that you bring into question, and you described the labyrinth of responsibility that he's now going to have to take on. But he also said a few days ago something that was very inflammatory to many people, that women should not have combat roles. We want to take a listen to that.
I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal, has made fighting more complicated. Most of them actually are, a lot of them are pushed, I shouldn't say most, but many are pushed into a combat track because they're so highly capable. But if they had their first choice, it probably wouldn't be that.
Of course, there are hundreds of thousands of women serving in our military right now. How do you see this potentially playing into what things look like next year? I mean, what is the fallout from this? And is this one of many potential concerns that you might have of him taking leadership here?
Well, I mean, I'm more worried, frankly, about the things that are profoundly important, like setting the national security strategy and understanding what the forces can do and what they can't do, because you can't go and take on everybody. Now, these issues you just mentioned there, that's certainly a very emotional issue for a lot of people. There's a lot of difference of opinion on that. This is something I think is a minority view. And you know, look, the bottom line is that the Secretary of Defense has to produce the most effective combat fighting force that we have. That's supposed to predominate above all. And sometimes that means making hard choices. But you can't make politically correct choices if they don't actually result in increased capability. And I think that's going to be another very difficult thing for him to navigate.
Retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you for your time today, sir.
My pleasure.